Well, good afternoon. This is Chris Knopp, the Executive Director of Friends of the Boundary Waters. Uh, it is January 29th, which is Permit Day. So for all of you Boundary Waters enthusiasts, I hope you were able to get the permits of your choice. And if not, there's still time and still many days left in the year to plan a meaningful Boundary Waters canoe area wilderness trip. Well, we have an exciting and really great lunch with the friends today. We have Kim Schultz, who is both the writer and the actor in the one actor play, The Root Beer Lady, the story of Dorothy Molter. And Kim did this play 2 years ago, and it was so popular that it was brought back. Again, and so we are so delighted. Opening night was this Saturday, and I had the pleasure of being at opening night again, and it was a real knockout. Everyone who attended loved it, and so it is with great pleasure we have Kim here this afternoon. Some little bit of housekeeping here. You will see on your screen there. There's a chat function there. Drop in some comments there, and we'll answer, respond to your comments there. And, there's a Q&A tab as well for asking questions. If some of you met Dorothy Molter, maybe you want to drop in an anecdote in the chats there, and we can respond to it. And so I know there are a number of folks out there that had the pleasure of meeting Dorothy Molter in person. And so I will start the program here where we get to talk to Kim Schultz here. And as a starting point, Kim, what drew you to Dorothy Molter's story, and what do you think makes her such an important figure in the history of the Boundary Waters?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. Very thrilled to be back here again for a second invitation for Friends of the Boundary Waters. What a great group, an important group, and thank you for all the advocacy and the work you do, and the protection of, and the joy of the Boundary Waters. So it's a great honor. So what drew me to the project initially was I was up at Tofty Lake Center, which some folks may be familiar with on Tofty Lake. As an artist, working with another artist on a completely different play, and just stumbled across the story of Dorothy Molter, and kind of fell in love in an instant and went, what is this story? I'd never heard of her before, had no experience with the Root Beer Lady prior to being up at Ely at the Tofty Center. So I felt kind of immediately in love and was writing pages very soon. Thought I certainly needed to write a play about this woman. And I have done solo shows in the past and was interested in creating a solo show about her. I perhaps maybe a bit too soon right now, but I will just share I was going to do a multi-actor play, a multi-character play. I thought, well, it doesn't have to be a solo show. Maybe it's just, a regular play with lots of different actors. But the more I kept working on it, the more I kept being drawn to Dorothy wanting to tell her story and having that be a solo show vehicle where Dorothy gets to push back against those headlines and tell the story that she wants to tell. But now I got so distracted, I forgot the second part of your question.
Although maybe pulling on the thread,
Yeah.
maybe explain your creative process as you became aware of her. How did you explore the creative process, both researching and that filtering out of making it a one actor play? Explain
Yeah,
your creative process there. Yes.
I read everything and watched everything that, has been written and created about her. So I read the books, I watched the documentary. Eventually I went to the museum. That was later in the week, the Dorothy Molter Museum, of course, up in Ely. And so was just trying to get as much information as I could and make sure that I was understanding the story as best I could. But yeah, I mean, I think I really felt that I wanted it, I felt like I wanted it to be her telling her story in the way that she could tell in a solo show format. So I think it was most interesting to me um, for um, for her to, to share that in that format. Um, because I think her story is such a unique one and such a special one that I think how interesting to see it through her eyes. No one else is, because we all, as a lot of your guests here might share, and I met so many people, unfortunately, I'm not one of them, but who had their own Dorothy story, which is remarkable and which is, helps tell us who she is and helps create this idea of her. But what I was interested in is what from her perspective. Now, of course, I'm not Dorothy, so I can't really 100% say for certain from her perspective, but was certainly looking from the research I did to speak from her as authentically as I could.
You began this process prior to the pandemic, right? And then you
Correct.
kind of moved into the pandemic, and that and that intervened. Were you continuing to write during the pandemic and refining the script?
Yeah, so I left Tofty with, about half the play and was, just gung ho, and by January, early February of 2020 was writing, and then the pandemic happened, and it kind of lots of artists had lots of different reactions to the pandemic. I was not one that found great vitality during that time, so my pen and paper went down, and I did not pick them up again until late that fall when Ron Peluso, the artistic director at the time at the History Theater, I had emailed him, I think pre-pandemic, and said, I'm working on this, and would you be interested? And he said, for sure, send me some pages. And then he reached out again. Uh, the History Theater had read some pages and were interested. But then the pandemic happened. And like I said, I went into my own artistic lockdown. And then when Ron Peluso reached out at that time, he offered a virtual reading of it in 2021, which then inspired me to open back up my computer and dig back into the story. So then we did a virtual reading of it from my kitchen table in Chicago in 2021 with the History Theater connected to their raw stages works. And then based on that and after that, I was thrilled to be invited to do a full production in person in 2023. And that was the world premiere at the History Theater in St. Paul, Minnesota. And that is where I was invited back and where I'm currently performing.
Great. Did being isolated in the pandemic help you connect with Dorothy Molter and her sort of isolation in the wilderness?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it did. And when I came out of it, I was pretty prolific. When I when I started writing again, I was on fire. So I think something happened there. But I do think about that, and I think about how interesting that I would write a story about a woman who lived in a lot of isolation, not obviously all isolation, but who spent a good deal of time isolated in a time when we were isolated. And I was living alone and felt that same isolation. And I think the irony of fostering, or whatever the word is I can think of right now, stewing in my brain all during that time in 2020 that led up to, the virtual reading of it in 2021. So I think that's an interesting question, Chris, and I think that that does have a part of it. And I think that that probably is reflected in the writing because I spent a lot of time um, thinking about how she would feel about that loneliness and that isolation. And did she feel lonely? And I pull on that string in the show, and I explore that in the show about is lonely the same as is lonely the same as alone? And was she lonely? Did everyone think she was lonely, but maybe she wasn't? Or did she have moments of loneliness? Um, and that thing that we all experience, the human experience that we all have of loneliness and aloneness, and how that was perhaps reflected and refracted differently with her being in the wilderness, truly alone in the wilderness. But she might say not, because she had all her animals and everybody around her. So
That's a really important thread to pull on, that distinction between being alone and loneliness, and you
mhm.
you explore that in the play, and that's really it's really powerful. So she wasn't, alone in the sense that, she had thousands of visitors, or she wasn't
Yeah.
lonely in that way. And why don't you play on that a bit, because you kind of explore that throughout the play there, and she bristled at that description as the loneliest woman in the world.
Yeah. She was interviewed by the Saturday Evening Post. Uh, Boy, I say it in the show, but I can't think of the reporter's name. In the 1952 Saturday Evening, Andrew Hamilton. She was interviewed by Andrew Hamilton in the 1952 Saturday Evening Post, and he dubbed her the loneliest woman in America. And, in truth, that was actually what caught my eye the most over the Root Beer Lady and everything else as I was doing my initial research was, who's this woman who's dubbed the loneliest woman in America? And then as I continued to explore her story, it really interested me with how she might feel about that. And now there's not a whole lot of quote unquote proof of her reaction to that. So I certainly took some artistic license, but I took that artistic license based on what I had read and what I believe that perhaps she was feeling at that time, and perhaps years later even, not even at that time, but like as she approaches her death, and as she gets older, like what is that, and was she lonely? And as we all do as we get older, to look back at our lives and to reflect and to look at the road not taken, and for her to maybe look at some of those roads not taken. And I have her saying, I don't have any regrets. And as an actor, I I keep that moment open for me when I play it, as far as, does she have regrets? Is that the truth? Is she just saying that? Is she lying? And so I play that moment every time, and it comes out a little bit differently, because I don't think she had regrets, but I think she is uncertain as those words come out, if that's the truth. And maybe that's for all of us. But she's a human being like we all are. And so she has, I would assume, had the same doubts and confidences and skepticism and worry that we all do, right? She just happened to
Mhm.
live in a very unique and special way that very few people would be able to claim.
That's right. It's always the road not taken, and we always kind of wonder, had we taken, a different road, how our lives would turn out. And you're based in Chicago, and Dorothy was from Chicago, and
Yeah.
so she was exploring, getting education to be a nurse, right? And
Yep.
uh, and as someone who's now a Chicagoan, could you kind of relate to that sort of, vast difference between the urban big city of Chicago and being in the wilderness?
Oh, I'm sure it was night and day for her. She was living in Chicago with her family, going to nursing school. Everyone expected her to get married, settle down, become a nurse, and there's your life. It's right there ahead of you. And she accidentally, I'll say, went up to the North Woods with her dad on a fishing trip. It sounds like she was a last minute replacement for somebody who got sick. And she just had an eye-opening, life-changing experience. I think, where she just went, wow. And I have her saying the words home, recognizing it as home immediately. And I think what a difference that must have been. And I also have her saying, and I can't remember if this was from my imagination or from things I read, but her saying, I never knew a place like this could exist, and I wanted to stay here forever. Um, because I imagine the difference of the city Dorothy, the Chicago Dorothy, versus, the North Woods, Boundary Waters, Dorothy, and the difference that must have been. And for her to see this pristine 1930 lake and sky and trees and birds, and have just found her home, I think it's remarkable. And I love exploring that, both as an actor on stage and as a writer, certainly exploring, um, then how do you do that, right? So then you find this thing and you're like, wow, I want this thing. And then, but you're 23, and there's expectations at the time. It's 1930. Women just didn't do that. She was, like I mentioned, expected to get married and start a family and be a nurse. And she just said, I don't want that. I want this. And so, what are those steps where a woman in 1930 says, I don't want that, I want this. And a strong woman, a brave woman, a remarkable woman who can make that happen.
For sure. Dorothy is a combination of both independence and resilience. And how did you tap into that? How did you, what's the process for you to kind of really tap into that vein of thinking of her, as you mentioned, a woman in the 1930s expected to be a nurse and expected to follow those social conventions, yet choose a much different path. How does it resonate with you? How do you do that?
Oh, I don't know. It's I don't actually know how I do it.
Hmm.
I think that I try to place myself in her in that moment. I try to think about what it would be like for her. I mean, it's obviously impossible. I'm a woman in 2025. I'm not 23 years old, but looking at how that might be and using my imagination and my heart and all of that to try to imagine. I mean, that's the job of the actor, right? And to try to create for an audience truth so that you can recognize as a truthful feeling and a truthful emotion and a truthful journey. So that's my job as an actor, is to create that for the audience. And so I have to find ways of feeling that as an actor. Um, and certainly the playwright, ha ha ha, has helped me with that. So that I like, and it's an interesting, we can, also speak, if you like, about the connection between playwright and actor, as I'm playing the role of both playwright and actor in this process, and how, I'm writing the words and I'm imagining that emotional journey, and then there's a separation at some point, but it's always me, the actor, and me, the writer, who's creating this world and this experience for the audience, hopefully that they are, emotionally engaged and excited by.
Well, that's a really important area to explore, that being the playwright and the actor and that interplay. Did you write it thinking, oh, this is I am Dorothy Molter? Is that how you approached it?
I did, yeah, because I'm an actor and I knew I would want to do it. There might be
Mhm.
come a time where I give it off to somebody else to do. Certainly, if I decide that I don't want to perform the show anymore, then perhaps there will come a time where I don't. But when I wrote it, I knew I would be, or I assumed I would be doing it. Just because I'm an actor, I knew it's a great role for me. It's appropriate for me in the ways that are typical, and and so I wrote it knowing that I would likely be performing it. But again, like I said, solo shows often then, when the performer is tired of doing it or can no longer do it, somebody else might pick up the show and do it as well. But certainly I created it at the time thinking about myself. Uh, but in a way, I wasn't really thinking about myself. It wasn't like I was writing for Kim, you know. I put myself as Dorothy, and I was trying to say the things that Dorothy would say as the playwright. I wasn't thinking about how Kim would do something. That comes late, that comes later. But the early stages are about, okay, what are the facts? What do I know about Dorothy's life? And what do people say about it? What has been said about her? And what has she said? We had access to some of her journals. The museum gave us some other additional access to things. Obviously, I visited the museum and saw what everybody sees, read every article that was ever published about her, read every book, saw the documentary, did the research so that I know what was said about her and then also what she said about herself. And then from there, so then I have these facts or this, at least assumed base of knowledge. And then from there, I use my imagination and trying to stay true to that, obviously not trying to um, make anything up that wouldn't necessarily perhaps have happened, but I use my imagination as a playwright and I take artistic license to have her think about things and share different internal worries or thoughts or concerns or explorations that she had. And so that's the fun job of a playwright is, okay, what would she have thought about being lonely? What did she think about being called the loneliest woman in America? What did she think about marriage? Everyone,
Mhm.
had all their rumors about her, and what do we know about that? What do we think she might have thought about that? And then as a playwright, I get to explore that, and as an actor, I get to explore it every night.
That's also so interesting. So now as you're doing the research and gathering all this, what is your writing process? Is do you outline it fully and then fill it in, or how do you write? Kind of exploring that part of your artistic dimension here is, you know, as a playwright? How do you write?
It depends on the project. I don't have a set way of writing it. I've written a memoir as well, um, uh, a book, a memoir, and then I've written several plays. So I would say in terms of a play like this, um, what was my process? I think my process was I put down, yeah, in a way I outlined early on. I just, for a while, I listed everything that I wanted to include. Blizzard, getting Bill into the blizzard when he was almost dying with a kidney infection. The birds, her relationship with Veritic, her sister and losing the dentures, like the stories that I knew that I wanted to include. And then I think I probably started writing out some of those stories. And then I do remember at some point going, okay, what's going on? And then going back and doing an outline form and thinking about, you know, where things might live. And then also, you know, how I landed her. And I don't want to give anything away, but not necessarily that people think she's living, because clearly she's not. But I do have her starting the play at her kitchen table after she has died. And so looking at, you know, making that choice to be, okay, like, is this taking place in 1986? Is this taking place in 2025? And what is the more interesting choice to make in terms of her looking and reflecting on her life? Um, so once I made that choice, then it kind of made sense. Okay, let's go back, uh, timeline, what's the word? Chronologically, to, you know, what was it like when she first got there, and then put that stuff in and then start telling the journey. But the fun part is like, okay, so we have these stories, but now who's the person, right? And so then like, when is she, like for me, though, some of the most fun moments are the exploration with the audience, the quieter moments, the direct address, you know, the vulnerability um, that she shares with the audience in terms of her choices and in terms of being alone and um, in terms of her dad's death and all of those. So like those moments I think are special for me as a performer, and they were fun to find both as a writer, where they go and what are the words, and then as a performer is, you know, how do I play those, and how does the audience get included in those moments?
Or that choice, that is an interesting choice to kind of start, you know, kind of at the end and have a reflection back. And did it take you a long time to kind of contemplate, you know, that was that sort of that's kind of one of those fundamental choices as a writer, like, you know,
Mhm.
kind of that sort of perspective, and that or is that something that came naturally, like, oh, this makes sense to reflect back, or is this something you kind of really, you know, struggled with or contemplated before kind of taking that route?
I think my first line of the show was always the first line. They called me the loneliest woman in America,
Mhm.
because I think that that was always where the play started for me. And then I think from that line, it made sense because it's past tense that it would have been her reflecting on that.
Mhm.
And then I guess maybe if I were to try to really think back 4 years ago, I think then probably I went to, how did she get to there? You know, I looked at what are the other names she was called. What else did she, how else was she referred to? What were the headlines about her? And, you know, it was always against pushing back against the headlines, is all these headlines for this woman, you know, who lived alone in the Boundary Waters, and the reporters and the headlines and how everybody called her all the things they called her, and then who was she really? You know, and that was always, and you might be interested to know the original title of the play was The Loneliest Woman in America. And that's what I wanted to call it, because that's what she was to me more than the root beer lady. But then Ron Peluso highly encouraged me, former artistic director of History Theater, to consider the root beer lady, since everybody was, that's how she is known. So she would be recognizable, more so, I think, as the root beer lady than perhaps Loneliest Woman in America. But I still keep that as my subtitle to it, um, because that was, I think, the inspiration for the play.
And that's the theme that you come back to throughout the play, you know, kind of have that reflection of, you know, what what that moniker of the loneliest woman in the world means. When you're acting there and those creating those moments of vulnerability, and do you try to create a cadence, throughout the play, because you do it for 90 straight minutes. So it's kind of in some ways pretty grueling. There's not an intermission for you. And so as
No, I
you're,
should have written one. It is.
I was wondering that, boy, like we're, it's just it's an endurance test to be able to be,
It is, yeah.
on and in that role for 90 minutes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just got distracted. Yes, Root Beer Lady was the first book that I saw, Nadine, by Bob Carey up at Tofty, and that's the book that introduced Dorothy to me. So thank you for sharing that. Yes, Chris, I'm sorry. What was the question? I got tied in the intermission. So there's no intermission. So how do
Sure.
I?
When I, kind of, that sort of crossing that line from writer then to performer, uh, you're 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 uh, you're trying to create a connection to the audience, and you do those through those moments of vulnerability, and
Yeah.
and you know, tell us about how you try to create that connection with the audience, because it's a live performance here.
Yeah. Um, I feel like Dorothy talks so much. There's so much talking that what I want permission to do, and maybe I'm doing a little bit more of it this year, is just having a little bit more quiet time and not talking time with the audience. And that's maybe where some of the vulnerability comes. Certainly it comes with the text and some of the movement as well and all of that, but certainly the quiet moments that I really love exploring with a live audience, because we all get a little nervous and I love it. Like, and then when we go together, it's the breath. I think what people don't always remember or know about live theater is how important the audience is. And, we had somebody, we've had shows where people, other shows, not this one necessarily, where people are, open up their cell phones, or, the candy wrappers, or the talking, or, some constant coughing. It's such a give and take, and you affect me so much as an audience, and I hope I'm affecting you. So that it's a real, I mean, this is the beauty and the miracle of live theater, is that sure, I do generally the same thing every night, but it's not the same thing. And it is very much, every moment feels different if I'm going to be a good actor in the moment and be making those decisions with the audience. And I feel your breath and I feel you with me, or I feel you not with me. So I go faster because I feel like you're bored, or, there's a real give and take with live theater, and especially with solo show work, because it's so intimate. More standard shows, you're working with somebody on stage, audience is still crucially important, but in a slightly different, or perhaps more distant, I don't want to say the word distant, but in a different way than with solo show, where it's just me and you, like that's it. And sure, my stage manager and, a few of the other technicians, but it's just you and me. And I'm not sure that people fully always comprehend that relationship in live theater, and how magical it can be.
Yeah, it really is a relationship, isn't it? And that sort of, especially the one actor play like that, there's a dynamic between the audience and the actor. Now, this is the second run of the play. Did you make changes between the first run? I'm trying to remember,
Yeah.
in those greater moments of silence. What sort of changes did you make in this run?
Yeah, we made a few changes. I certainly made a couple cuts. I think the show probably runs maybe 3 minutes shorter than it did 2 years ago. Cut out one short story that I felt was too close to the end and was holding us up a little bit. Because once you start hitting to the end, you gotta keep rolling. And so let's see, made some line changes here and there, made some cuts here and there. The biggest change I would say we made was the removal of the headlines. As I mentioned earlier, that I think for me, the inspiration for the play was the pushback against the headlines. And we used to have them visually presented on a big banner headline that was in the sky. And we cut that this year, as we felt it was just a little bit too distracting and took people out of watching me. And we want I say all the headlines, so it's not like the headlines are still present, they're just not visually present. And that was a hard one for me to let go of as a playwright, because I like the visualness of that as a playwright, but also, let's look at what's going to serve the story the most. And so we felt that cut. So if people saw it in 2023 and 2025, they might notice that change. And also, the original director, Addie Gorlin Hahn, came in one day and said, "What if we had a Christmas tree when she writes her Christmas letter?" Folks who know Dorothy might know that she wrote an annual Christmas letter to every year. And eventually she, I think, oh, that was in an earlier draft that got cut too. I forgot. I used to have more of the letters that we ended up cutting in 2023, but there was more of her talking as herself, like, "Dear friends." But then she also, those who might know in this group, I'm sure, know that she started having some of her animal friends write the letters. So, Hummy the hummingbird wrote one Christmas letter, or Vera Tick wrote a Christmas letter, or, her animals, she would do their voices, which I think is just hysterical. And so anyway, so one of the parts of the show is the Christmas letter bit. And Addie Gorlin Hahn, the original director, this year, the remount is directed by Jess Yates, um, suggested a Christmas tree. And we're like, what? What a crazy idea. So now we create this lovely little moment for, just a couple minutes while she's writing it, of a beautiful Christmas in the North Woods. Because Dorothy, also people might know here in this group, would always decorate and put up a tree. Christmas was her favorite, in her own words. Christmas time was my favorite time. So we try to honor that by giving her a little moment of Christmas in the play as well.
Yeah, that Christmas letter is a really interesting dimension to her. So she's, you know, exploring that relationship. She had a relationship to the people that visited, and and part of her expression of that relationship was in this letter. And maybe talk a little bit more about this letter that people that may not have known Dorothy or so, or seen the play yet. Talk about
Yeah.
that part of things.
Yeah, she would send a letter out to everybody who wanted to get on her list. And I have her saying her list grew longer every year. And people loved the letter. Apparently, we might have some people on this call who know about that and who maybe even received them. But she would send out an annual letter telling about the year. Like, Cap was up here, her dad was up here this summer, and, oh, root beer sales were this, and, oh, you should see the trees. They're so beautiful. Right now we had our first big blizzard, updating everybody. And we have those letters, and I think they're maybe in Bob Carey's book as well. So how wonderful that, we have a lot of those letters still. But it was her way, I think, of staying in touch with, uh, yeah, they're certainly available online, and I do think they're at the end of Bob Carey's book. The question in the chat about are the letters viewable. Um, but yeah, I think that was her way of staying in touch with people. And this is why I also have her saying at that point, everyone wants to know, what was it like to live up here all alone? And I have her wryly retorting, as if I ever was, because of all the people who would always be there all summer, and then, all the Ely folks who would come up and stay. And but I think it was her way of staying in touch with people, and it really showed her strong sense of community. And also, I think she's billed as this, and she was certainly, and people who met her speak to this, she was a strong, you know, I don't want to say hard, but she had to be somewhat hard to live up there and to endure what she endured. And then she writes a letter in the voice of a bear, it's just this silliness and this like playfulness, which I find really endearing and charming about her. Um, because of, what that also opens up in terms of her personality and who she was. And that's, it's really what I try to do in this play is who the full person of Dorothy. So people might have a glimpse of her, we bought a root beer from her, or she helped us when we had a bear attack and she gave us some food. She was very kind to us. She helped us. She did this. She was out of root beer, it was really disappointing. Or, she was, they had this glimpse.
It's like we have a little connectivity problems, folks. We'll, keep at it for a moment here, and we'll get a connection going here. So I'll work to get the connectivity here, everyone. Uh, Maybe Kim will hop off and rejoin us here. I'll While we're waiting for Kim to rejoin us here, I know there were a number of interesting comments in the chat in the chat function there, and that one of these is a great place to camp is at the west end of Robbins Island, just north of Dorothy's Island. There is a beautiful campsite just north of Dorothy's Island there, and if you go by there, it's a great spot to stop. When I was paddling through there this summer, someone had that site, and I kept going myself there. Hi there. Well, welcome back, Kim. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't know when you lost me, my Wi-Fi went out and I was talking to myself, I think, for a long time. Apologies.
Well, thank you for rejoining us here. We'll come back to some of the Dorothy Molter specific stories here. But I thought I'd provide the audience this afternoon with a little bit more background about yourself, and to give people a sense of a little bit more about you. And you wrote a memoir, 3 Days in Damascus, and maybe explore, tell folks a little bit about your memoir there, and a little bit about your work in the Middle East and dealing with refugees there.
Sure, yeah. So I'm an actor and a writer, and the writing came later in my life. And it's interesting because just how people define you and what you're allowed to do. I was certain that I was told once that I wasn't a good writer, and so that stayed with me for 20 years until one day I took a class and somebody said something different, and I went, "Huh, isn't it interesting how how sometimes we can live our lives by something that was once told us by a parent or a adult or a child or who knows what, but how that can shift if if you like realize the maybe the made up rules that you're living by." So I started writing secondary and did a couple other plays, mostly autobiographical plays. And then in 20 what was it, 20, why can't I remember? 20, oh my gosh, 2010, I can't remember exactly the year, it doesn't matter. I was invited to go to the Middle East at the time. It was post-Iraqi war, and I was invited to go and interview Iraqi refugees who were living in Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria with an NGO out of New York City. I was living in New York at the time. And so I went over to the Middle East and interviewed, and I remember I was working on a TV pilot at that time, and I thought, oh, fun, I'll just go on this trip to the Middle East and do this, write this play, come back and pick up my life where I left off. And that was impossible because I had a pretty life-changing experience over there, meeting with refugees and hearing their stories. And I came back and I wrote the play called No Place Called Home. I also fell in love with a refugee while I was over there. And so it's a love story. And I allowed that love story to be, to open up a love story for all refugees. And so I became a refugee and immigrant advocate, which I still am, believing like we believe in caring for our earth. We also, I believe, should be caring for each other and the continued devastations of climate change and war, and how people are suffering through that and need kindness and help. And that play, No Place Called Home, came out of the process that I had with Iraqi refugees. And I was lucky to do that in New York and tour it for a couple years around the Midwest and other places, and including in St. Paul. I actually had a run at another theater in St. Paul that I'm blanking on right now. And then eventually out of that, I realized that I needed to share more of the stories that I wanted to, that I just could do in a play. And I wrote the book 3 Days in Damascus, which is a memoir, which is available if anybody's interested. But it tells a little bit more about my love story with Omar, and tells the stories of the Iraqis that I met many years ago. And I think about them often, and they changed, they changed me. I don't think you can have an experience like that and not be changed. So I was certainly changed, and what I came back to was nothing like I thought it would come back to. So when I found the root beer lady, it was a bit of a surprise. And I think that's probably also why, for me, it's not just about, the root beer lady, but it's about the woman, and it's about the care she took of the planet. And it's about the importance of environmental care during, this climate change that we are suffering under and will continue to suffer under, the importance of wilderness, the importance of care for our planet. And I think that that really spoke to me as I was writing this play about Dorothy as well. Even though perhaps she pushed back and she was, upset about the Wilderness Act, and she, they wanted to offer land and they tried to kick her out and all the things that she was unhappy about. I think eventually she came to realize the importance of all of that, in terms of care for the place that she called home and that she loved for 56 years. So.
Yeah, getting back to Dorothy there, and it's interesting. Our organization was founded to pass the 1978 Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness Act that really enshrined the protection that we know today of the wilderness area. And so, Dorothy Molter's in the wilderness, in the environment, and here we are, effectively at odds with her to a degree because,
Yeah.
trying, she's the forced removal, if you would, of her, and yet in a more authentic sense, she was rooted in the land than someone who comes up for a few days or so. She was literally rooted in the land for 56 years. And so it's like, who has a greater stake in it? Who has and this sort of um, dichotomy, plays out to this plays out to this day. But certainly by her death in 1986 and those years preceding it, there was really sort of a convergence and sort of where both, as you alluded to, Dorothy had a recognition of the importance of that protection, and the folks that were dedicated to protecting her, both the community of conservationists, but also the U.S. Forest Service, realized,
Yeah.
boy, it's not us versus them, but it's we,
Yeah.
and finding that common ground. Maybe explore a bit about that, those last few years of Dorothy there.
Yeah, no, I think it's exactly it. And I mean, I think that's lessons for us right now, right? It's we, not us and them.
Mhm.
So, 100%, I think, and from my, understanding, she did push back and she didn't like all the things that were happening, because, she she was doing the work up there. She's fine. Leave me alone, you know. Um, but uh, but I think that she did come to a point where she understood what they were trying to do. And I have her saying, like they did take care of her in the final years. Like they gave her a lot of trouble, you know, perhaps rightfully so. What, they were trying to do what they were trying to do in terms of caring for the wilderness. And they had this, old white lady living up there. So, but then, letting her, and I will just say that, I think her being an old white lady, there's indigenous people who have been living there for centuries. And she, due to no short fact that she was a white woman who had white friends who were helping to keep her on the land. We have to acknowledge that. And, even that, you know, there's lots of indigenous people whose stories are not being shared. But we are sharing the Dorothy Molter story. So just recognizing the amount of indigenous people who also live on the land. But so I think that she did push back, and she was she was she was who she was. But I have her, and I think, towards the end of her life, she understood the importance of it. And the Forest Service took good care of her and they helped her. And she got to, what a dream. She got to die in the place that I have her saying, to die in the place that I loved for 56 years. Like, what a lucky woman I am. That she didn't have to leave, and that she could die up there at Knife Lake at Isle of Pines. And um, I think that that was perhaps the best case solution for it all. But obviously the Wilderness Act is important in designating it as the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. These are all crucial things to protecting this beautiful, beautiful land that we have up in northern Minnesota. Uh, and I think she would 100% agree today. I feel like she would see the importance of it.
For sure. I think that her ethic and her worldview, the paradigm, coincides really well with the protection values. And I'm just trying to imagine what a government official handing her a offer to buy for eminent domain or a little
Yeah, yeah,
piece of paradise, how the current sort of clash of independence and resilience with this sort of formality and bureaucracy almost.
yeah.
It's just comical to contemplate that. It's just
Yeah, and in the play I have her, I made a choice that the Forest Service guy who came up was kind of out of his place, he was kind of just young and kind of nervous and kind of not really of nature, and she's like, of nature. And the back and forth that in my imagination could have happened with one of the forest people who get one of the officials who came up to, try to buy her out and to get her off the land, and that her necessary pushback, and in the play I have her saying, look, this is my home, I live here, I'm a good caretaker, I protect the water and the land, I pick up trash, I help people, I help animals, I'm a good person up here, leave me alone, so.
you brought up another topic a moment ago about the Native American indigenous presence in the boundary waters, and I kind of welcome folks that are viewing this. I know Benny Ambrose lived just to the east of Dorothy here, but I've also heard from folks that on Basswood Lake there was an Anishinaabe family that lived on Basswood Lake, I think well maybe into the 90s. And so if anyone viewing this knows that story, if you want to drop something in the chat,
Oh, I
this
would
is
love that.
this would be really interesting to explore this other dimension of living in the wilderness and living in harmony with the wilderness. As folks know, the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness and all the Arrowhead is part of the 1854 treaty area, and then there are three Native nations that now have retained rights in their Boys Fort, Grand Portage, and the Fond du Lac bands. And so this is something as our organization grows and evolves and tries to be really responsive and explore the meaning of wilderness in a deeper way and more inclusive way, is to look at that indigenous heritage of the region. And so this is something I'm very interested in as an organization, exploring and looking at ways in which we can be allies with indigenous communities and incorporate incorporate that important dimension. We, as some viewing this may know, in addition to our land acknowledgement on our website, we have information beneath that regarding the history of the 1854 treaty and the legal cases in the 70s, 80s, and 90s that led to the reassertion of those retained rights that are in those treaties. So anyone who has more information on that, I welcome your dropping in the chat or reaching out to us after this.
I would too, and I appreciate that, Chris, so much. And if you hear anything, sending my way would be appreciated, because those are the kind of things that that I love including, as program notes or mentioning in talkbacks, or that kind of information is really useful, just in terms of creating space for all the stories, not just the white stories. So. And I think
And
this group, is the group that cares about the land, right? This is the Friends of the Boundary Waters. So, they understand the importance of the land protection and the wilderness protection and keeping this for generations to come, so that this is available for everybody. And somebody had mentioned the copper mining, and yes, that we protect as much as we can. Of these sacred wilderness spots that we have in this country.
Kim, it is really an important time for us on that protection end. We've been at this for almost 50 years, and this, as folks know, with the proposed copper sulfide mines at the edge of the boundary waters, it really presents an existential threat to the future of the wilderness. And We've been in court. We're trying to enact legislation, and obviously with changes at the federal level with the Trump administration, we're very, very concerned about that. And we've been in Washington D.C. a couple times already. This month of January, we'll be present there, and we're prepared for the next steps we need to take in order to protect the wilderness. And for everyone that's watching, we are an extension of all of you as an organization that we reflect your values and reflect your wishes, and we very much view that we have a relationship with all of you to carry out your wishes to protect the wilderness.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful for that, because it is only advocacy, the advocacy that we do, that is going to make a difference here in fighting money in corporate and big business who wants to make money off of these lands. So grateful for all the work that everyone does. And if I can have a small piece of it in trying to tell the story and reminding people of the beauty and the wonder of the Boundary Waters and of wilderness, that the Wilderness Act defines wilderness as an area where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man, where man himself is a visitor who does not remain. And I have Dorothy pushing back and saying, now why they couldn't say women in that definition, I'll never know. But it's not where we remain, it's where we come and go from, and we experience, right? So we want to be able to have that for generations to come.
For sure. And some people are asking some questions at the beginning there in the Q&A. Just want to respond to the kind of the basic. Where can one see the play? Well, it's at the History Theater in downtown St. Paul. And yes, thank you, Deborah, for responding to that. So opening night was last Saturday, and it will be running. Maybe you want to give a little background on how long it's running, so people can get their tickets and take all this in, Kim.
Sure, yes, I'd love to have folks join us. Tickets are still available. The matinees are filling up, so if you're interested in that, you might want to book sooner rather than later. But we are running through February 23rd, so another almost a month yet. And the show runs Thursday through Sundays. As I said, there's evenings and matinees. You can check the schedule at historytheater.com, and it's in St. Paul, Minnesota. And so we hope that you can join us. You can share folks who you think would appreciate the Dorothy Molter story to join us sometime in the next month at the History Theater. And Eric, I would love for you to see it again, and you can look for those differences that I mentioned and come say hi afterwards.
Yes. So Eric, we look forward to seeing you out there at the History Theater again to see the play there, and so responding to a few things here as well. Yes. That the Boundary Waters was specifically mentioned in Project 2025, and it's either on page 523 or 526. So it's one of those two. So it was specifically targeted, and so we are preparing for that. And Marilyn mentioned indigenous wisdom is wisdom that we need to listen to, and kind of getting into sort of where things are at right now. This stuff, and kind of, it's a technical thing, but an important thing. The U.S. Forest Service has been trying to be more inclusive and recognizing the retained rights of the Anishinaabe people on the land. And so right now there's actually a memorandum of understanding between the U.S. Forest Service and the three Native nations, Bois Forte, Fond du Lac, and Grand Portage, that have retained rights there. It's really just a framework at this point. And so giving content to that is an important step for the Forest Service, and in recognizing those retained rights, and also leading to some perhaps other practices with respect to indigenous fire and other ways of managing the land, and being a good steward and an inclusive steward here. And trying to look at some of these other ones, these stories about that David Lee met Dorothy in the 70s, and she gave a tour and talked about a deer she named Rhonda there that survived a wolf attack. Boy, that's you, that's boy, those David, that's quite a cherished memory to have, and quite a truly an enduring memory to have about that. Boy, that's you can just imagine the affinity that Dorothy had, that she ended up telling her those letters in that person or that in that viewpoint of the animals.
Yeah. And it's so funny, the bears, and everyone always about the bears, but it's just that cracks me up that she had a deer named Rhonda. I hadn't seen that one before. That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
There,
Yeah. And thank you for the reminder about the Dakota. Yes, of course.
there.
Yeah.
And we're near the end of our time here. I want to share a couple things before thank yous here. Um, and we have a couple things coming up here. As folks know, on Monday we had a trivia and route planning program. Well, we have another Boundary Waters trivia night coming up, and that is Wednesday, February 19th at 8 o'clock at Prize Brewing. So put that on your calendar there. We love coming together in community, and in the world of advocacy, it's important to celebrate and share this love of the wilderness and the outdoors with fellow travelers. And we also have a monthly meeting of our coalition, and that next one is Friday, February 21st. So that's 1 o'clock on Zoom, and we welcome everyone to be part of that. And then we have our public hearing on copper sulfide mining that will be at the Capitol on Monday, February 24th. So a busy month coming up here. And this hearing that we're having, it's a public hearing, but it's not a legislative hearing. It's not a legislative hearing because our legislative leaders have not wanted to have this public debate yet on copper sulfide mining that prevents a real dialogue and discussion of these important issues. So we are bringing that issue to the public, and you can get more information on our website, but it'll be at the Senate building at the Capitol here on Monday, February 24th. And finally, gratitude is an important part of life, and I want to thank all of you that are friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness here. But I especially want to thank Kim here for sharing her time and talents with us, and I would love to continue a discussion where we can maybe bring this play to the communities up north of Ely and Grand Marais and Duluth, and that would be a wonderful way of expanding this. Expanding the story that you tell so eloquently and powerfully in your one actor play, Kim. So thank you so much.
So happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me, Chris. And I hope to see people at the theater, or hopefully maybe up in Ely. So
great. Well, Kim, have a great afternoon, and everyone viewing this, have a great afternoon as well. And I hope you get the permits that you want. So thank you, Kim. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.